Hi everyone, and welcome to our hot topic presentation on charter schools. This video will be voice recorded by me, Christine Magana, and was compiled by Cameron Rahim. So a little bit about us. Cameron worked at a charter school last year and is now in the public school system. I myself went to a charter school for my K-8 education, did my student teaching at that same charter school, and now consistently substitute teach there. I want to start with, what is a charter school? So a charter school is an independently run public school that is based off a charter. They tend to have greater flexibility and freedom in how they run their school, not necessarily in what they teach. So they are a tuition-free school and a school of public choice. So that means parents get to choose where they want to go. What a charter is it operates under a contract between the school and the state, basically saying that we will achieve these same standards, we will get to the same point, but we're going to do it from our own way. By that, they are free from state regulation, but that also comes at a cost, which we will talk about later. So the biggest thing here is the freedom of choice. What I want to go over here is some key vocabulary terms. There is CMO, which is a charter management organization, which is a nonprofit and oversees multiple charter schools. An EMO is an educational management organization that is a for-profit. So these are two different ways that education is funded. So first of all, let's just look at some charter school statistics, and we're going to see how they came about and why. So Ray Budd in 1989, the education by charter was the first thought of this, and bringing up that the first charter was actually opened in 1992 in Minnesota. Now there are over 6,900 charter schools in 42 states that foster 3.1 million students. Charter schools tend to be a little smaller, averaging about 361 students per school compared to the traditional public school of about 510. Moving forward, it's difficult to open a charter school because they have to meet certain requirements to the charter and then submit that to the state. About 10% of charter petitions are rejected, typically for one or more of these main 5 reasons. They either have an unsound educational program, which means that they weren't able to come up with a plan that matches or closely identifies with the public school system and meeting these standards. Similar to those, demonstrating unlikeliness to succeed, inadequate number of signatures of support, not enough to detain in 15 elements that are required of charter schools, and meeting ed code. Denial of these are by a governing board. So getting into a charter school is the very first obstacle charter schools have versus being a normal district. First off, in this first part of this point, we want to look at benefits of charter schools. So first, the biggest thing that most people are attracted to is families choose to attend rather than being assigned to their district school. Parents oftentimes can pick their teachers and have a better parent-teacher relationship. Successful by the accountability that is held between the parents and the community. There is not the middle ground that the state holds the school accountable. So the only way it is going to be successful is if the people who are choosing to attend it are continuously attending it and supporting it. We did an interview with a 3rd grade student at San Jose Charter School. She is an ambassador for the school and talks about her school, especially the Leader in Me program. So this school, in addition to their own curriculum, has a value curriculum that talks about different habits and ways for students to self-regulate. We quote her saying that we are a really good leadership school with so many clubs. She emphasizes in her interview that all students can join these clubs. It's not just the big kids or certain classes or the smart kids. She said you can interact with different grades. The middle school interacts with the elementary side, and that the teachers really get involved. She also notes in her interview the use of leadership binders, where students track their progress, say for a third grader, how they're doing on their multiplication facts. This way that they lead their own parent-teacher conferences. This helps students become accountable for their own work. Different charters have different programs like this that, as I said, were in addition to the original curriculum. Moving on, some other good parts about a charter is they represent a different way of organizing a school. Thus, they're a bottom-up way instead of the traditional public school of being top-down. What means is they look at the whole person and the goals that they want to achieve in line with the curriculum so that they can eventually meet those standards. As opposed to the traditional public schools that work top down, they look at the standards, they match the curriculum to the standards, and they flow off that. So this requires more innovation. Sometimes it requires making a new curriculum, customizing the curriculum, or adding other activities to it. So now we want to look at some benefits of working at a charter school. For this, we did research and along with an interview with Sarah Sherrod, who is one of the middle school math teachers at San Jose Charter as well. She's been working in a charter school for about 13 years and also has experience working in both public and the private zones. The biggest thing we want to note from her is we work as a team for everything. This is the biggest difference, she said, between a public and a private school. Every day there is collaboration between the different teams. On her case, the math team would meet, or the second grade team would meet, the fifth grade team would meet. They meet every single day to do their planning together, to make sure their tests are aligned, to make sure their study guides are aligned, and to make sure all students in that grade level are meeting the requirements. She did note that there was a lot more competition amongst teachers in the public school system, that it was kind of every class teacher for themselves, and to see whose second grade class could perform the best. She says it's not that way here. If there was an issue, if one of the lessons, they come together and they talk about that issue, seeing maybe if one teacher taught it better than the other. So definitely the collaboration was the biggest thing here. Also, administration is widely involved. They stop in on these meetings weekly, and they have lead teacher meetings and staff meetings that all play in to this school-wide collaboration. In addition, teachers can choose this school not just based on their data reputation, values, and what, but also the school's values and what they choose to teach. There is an increased opportunity to give input and see change, and the school has freedom in choosing the curriculum. So they're not confined by the restrictions or limitations or even the choices of the regular school, public school districts. So, in looking at what seems to be a fairly good system so far, why are people opposed to charter schools? So, the big thing here is money. A lot of people tend to think that charter schools are just in it for the money and picking their students in order to get the top students and outperform all the other schools in the area. They don't really think it's about increasing other students' success, and they believe that they're obsessed with test scores and quantitative data, meaning that there aren't these values going into education or anything else, that they just want to look like they're outperforming everything else. Another thing is it's bad for teacher unions because charter schools are not unionized typically. They're seen as weakening the collective of the power of teachers, that they're different. These are the ones that are going to oppose the norm if the teachers all decide to do something as a union. A big question here, which we kind of talked about earlier, is are charter schools really for profit? But really, we want to look at the percentages because they are not for profit. So why do charter schools exist in the first place? Taking a look at this, charter schools first came about because the failing system of public and private schools. They came up with a different way of organizing their schools. In public schools, they're meant again to do that top-down approach where you're just going based off the standards, you're meeting the standards every day, and that's school. Private schools have different reputations based off the reason for the private, but oftentimes have been called out for not meeting the standards. So this is somewhere that they're trying to meet in the middle. Another big question that goes along with that is there special education in charter schools? And if so, what does it look like? Well, charter schools are not exempt from the law in terms of guiding those who have special needs. So below, we're going to give some statistics on how special education works in charter schools typically. Again, every charter is different. So 7.6% of charters work off IEPs or have students with IEPs, excuse me, versus 8.9% in the traditional public schools. As we can see, this is a very similar amount. So special education still takes up about 8% of the student population. In terms of dealing with the severely handicapped, charter schools deal with 1.3% of their student population. Traditional public schools, that's 1.1%. Very similar numbers once again. Then we want to look at if special education is exclusively in the general education classrooms in terms of inclusion, or if they have completely separate classrooms total. Charter schools, showingly, typically have more of these inclusion classrooms with 39% versus the traditional public school of 19%. The school I work at has SPED services come into these classrooms. They are all inclusion classrooms, and students are rarely pulled out. They are only typically pulled out for speech or counseling, but not for any SPED reasons typically. There's no independent classes. Some charters do have separate classrooms. 25% of them do versus the traditional 20% of traditional public schools. So as we can see, once again, they are keeping up with special education with the traditional public schools. Next, we want to look at charter schools and their difficulties. So not all charter schools are able to take over an existing structured building. So sometimes they literally have to build from the ground up. This comes with not only finding that building, but finding the funding, getting the textbooks, the curriculum, pencils, papers, making sure everything is up to code. If they are taking it over an existing building, it typically needs extensive repairs because it's something that the school or the city hasn't already taken over. So now, how are charter schools held accountable if they're not regulated by the state? So their threat of closure is always real. If they're not keeping up with their charter, then that charter, they're going to lose their funding. So, and free from that traditional school structure, they need to be able to be keeping up with what they said they were going to do. They must meet certain performance provisions that are specified in their charter when it was originated, and failure to meet state laws can also lead to closure. So there's no guarantee with a charter school, and it's very independent, and that they're doing things semi on their own. Other aspects that contribute to this are low enrollment, problems with the facilities, and we talked about this in terms of maintenance and budget, and money is always an issue. Also, mismanagement. Because of that structure, we're always looking for things to go wrong. 6.9% of charter schools have been forced to close. And I want to recognize here that charter schools have only been around for a little over 25 years. So that number, if they're being forced to close, that's going to be for one of the reasons we've already talked about. And there's a very, very low percentage that have actually been closed because of academic performance. So what we've seen is that they're actually closing because their facility or because of that low enrollment. It's not actually because they're performing lower than traditional public schools. So now we want to look at what is the difference between charter schools and those traditional public schools. We're going to look at some statistics. There is actually a higher poverty and a lower socioeconomic status among private schools, with 34% going to charter schools, 20% at the traditional public schools. A big thing about charter schools is there seems to be an increase of having the ethnic and racial minorities, with 60% going to charter schools versus the 48% in traditional public schools. Charter schools have a reputation for catering to the African American and Latino populations. Then, looking at other aspects, charter schools tend to have more teachers under the age of 30, tend to have many more teachers with less than 3 years experience. Their average salary is lower, and very few of them are unionized, almost none of them. Finally, we want to look at the downfalls of working at a charter school. Again, we're going to refer back to our interview with Sarah Sheridan. So there is no teacher association, which means, again, they are not unionized. Very few are. There is no tenure, and there are less benefits. This is something that Sarah said in terms of working at charter school, she loves it, but the only major downfall is the benefit. In terms of retirement, she said she knew right away that her money wasn't going to be going from her paycheck into a good retirement program, so that's something that she has to regulate on her own. When she switched from a public to a charter school, she knew that she was going to have to go on her husband's insurance for her children, because the benefits and the financing for that aren't as good. Maternity leave is basic disability. You have to use your personal days off to get a longer maternity leave. Also, hours are typically contracted longer. There's longer school days and a lot of times also longer school years. So finally, I just want to include in here our references from our research are all included here. Thank you for watching, and I hope everyone learned a little more about charter schools.